Thank you, John. Thank you for that nice introduction. You really could have just started by saying, I'm older than dirt. I've been teaching APICS courses for a long, long time. And prior to teaching the courses, I actually did work in manufacturing, but I really love teaching. John's right. Since 2001, I've been teaching the classes full time, and I really, really love it. So we're going to talk a little bit about which of the ASCM certifications might be right for you. But we're going to spend the majority of the time with the assumption that you are trying to prepare for one of the exams. So we're going to talk about studying for and taking the test and using the learning systems effectively. So if you are one of those individuals who might be on the call with a little bit of a question about which of the courses you should take, I think my first answer would be all of them, because they all deal in different areas of supply chain. And having taken all three of them, I have found that my knowledge and my ability to communicate with others from outside of my own industry has increased tremendously. But if you were wondering where to start, then my answer would be, do you want to make improvements within the four walls of your company? Then the CPIM program would probably be the one for you. If you are looking to collaborate and communicate and integrate with your supply chain partners outside of the four walls of your company, and you want the real big picture, then I would go with CSCP. If you are working in any sort of logistics role within your organization or heavily involved with coordinating activities with logistics providers, then the CLDT might be the program that will expand your knowledge regarding all of the elements associated with warehousing, transportation, and distribution channels. So let me ask our audience, is there anyone who has a question about which area to focus on?
Hi, this is John Forlenzo. The CLTD, I'm not as familiar with as I am the other two. Could you maybe just elaborate on that one a little bit more, or maybe you will as you go further on? I'm not sure.
No, John, this is a perfect time to ask that particular question. So, the logistics course. So we have a little bit of feedback. John, maybe if you muted yourself again, you can still hear me, hopefully, but we won't get that feedback. So
yeah, I actually was on mute, so I'm not sure what that is. So.
Okay, so in the CLDT course, we go heavily into application of designing your logistics network, choosing the right partners, deciding where to put your warehouses, how many warehouses to have. We go heavily into discussion of all of the different elements behind transportation and working with the third-party logistics providers, fourth-party logistics providers. We go heavily into discussions about the different types of distribution channels that an individual company could select. We talk a lot about the elements of importing and exporting. If you said you're somewhat familiar with the other programs, then you might be aware that CSCP touches on many of these topics, but at a higher level, where CLDT really dives in to the issues associated with all of the elements of warehousing, transportation, and distribution. For instance, in CSCP, we touch a little bit about Incoterms. In CLDT, we get much more involved in the understanding of the different Incoterms. John, did that help?
It did. In making that kind of comparison between the CSCP and the CLTD, one being a little bit higher level and one being kind of the detail level, that does help me quite a bit. Now, it also, just in the description here, talks about direct and indirect manufacturing. Could you just maybe clarify what points it kind of touches on in that realm?
Oh, that's a great question.
Well, that's a great
touches
question.
on,
It touches on.
we've got that feedback thing. So it touches on elements associated with manufacturing product for yourself versus using contract manufacturing. So I have two CLDT classes going on right now, and last week with my new class that just started, we did a lot of talk about costing issues, understanding of the different elements of fixed versus variable costs associated with producing goods. Now, they're mostly a distribution partner in their particular supply chain. So at least they told me it was rather insightful in understanding what the costs that had to be considered for their manufacturing partners, what those costs were, and how to make a good comparison relative to producing goods yourself versus buying them from an outside provider. Other questions? Anybody?
Other questions?
That was perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to make the assumption now that the majority of our audience is here wanting to understand how to be successful in attaining these certifications. How do we pass those pesky exams? Well, let's talk first about studying for the exam. One of the things that I find that adults do that shoot themselves in the foot is that they try to carve out long periods of time to study. And that tends to be rather counterproductive. Adults seem to learn better in smaller study sessions, little, what we want to call maybe micro learnings. Take a little portion of the material and set aside 20 to 30 minutes and no more than that, and then take a break. If you do want to study longer after that first 20 or 30 minutes, then fine, go back to it, but take a break, get up, move around, clear your head a little bit. But it's much more effective, at least for adults with jobs and kids and other outside activities or volunteer work, trying to find that 2 to 3 hour period of time just doesn't seem to exist. And so we put it off and we put it off, and then before we know it, we're demotivated. If you could carve out even 20 minutes 4 to 5 times a week, and you did that consistently for 12 weeks or longer, you would have done more studying than if you would have tried to find that big chunk of time. So study in short sessions and be consistent to it. Make a deal with your family members that is your time to improve your knowledge and to earn the certification, and let them know how important this is to you so that you have their support. One of the things that I did not have to my avail years and years ago, I want to say 30 years ago now, when I went to study for CPIM, is that we had to contain or study to the material that we had in front of us. We did not have YouTube. We did not have Wikipedia. We didn't have Google to go do searches for us and find additional information. And so I still use these tools today when I'm preparing to teach a class. If something doesn't seem crystal clear to me, or if I still feel like, gee, I'd like to know just one little bit more about that, then I'll go and I'll do searches to try to find a different point of view. Now, on the exam, of course, the APICS material is going to be what is going to be tested, but it doesn't hurt to get a point amplified through another source. So go ahead and use those tools. The other thing that my students and I have found to be very helpful is to invest in other learning apps. The Pocket Prep is a wonderful app. There is a free version of it, and for a little bit of money, you can get the professional version of Pocket Prep. I was very leery about any other apps outside of the APICS tools when they first started to come out. But over the years, I've had many, many students be very successful in using Pocket Prep. And I too, in earning the CLT certification, I leaned on Pocket Prep for additional test questions or quiz questions And the other good thing about it was that I could do it wherever I was. I didn't at the time have, and I don't think ASCM at the time had the tablet or the smartphone application for their learning system. So Pocket Prep came in real handy. There's also tools in Quizlet and Kahoot. I had put some up in each of these apps. I built quite a library in Kahoot, and now the new CPIM 7.0 has me going back and revamping all of my questions and trying to move them into the right areas of the material. If you're not familiar with what I'm speaking about right now, CPIM 6.0 has just been replaced by the new 7.0 material. And it's nice material, except that everything has been sort of juggled around. And so my quiz questions don't align with the modules within 7.0 perfectly just yet, but I'm working on it. So use outside tools to help you and keep you motivated. If you can start a study group with some classmates or some others that you might have met in the process of attending one of the Danbury courses, challenge each other, help each other along. When I was studying for my CPIM a gazillion years ago, I studied with an engineer at the company that I worked in, and we actually set up study sessions twice a week. One night a week we met at my house and had to contend with teenagers and rock music. And when we were at his house, we had to contend with little ones, 2 and 3-year-olds crawling into our lap and wanting to see what we were doing. But it was helpful because it kept us both on our study program. And sometimes one of us would understand something a little bit better than the other, and we could amplify concepts for each other. The last thing I would say about success in studying for the exam is to apply what you're learning immediately. And I don't care if you apply this in a home situation or at a work situation. The more you apply what you're learning, the better you will understand it. So I mentioned my engineer friend Steve. When we were studying for our CPIM years and years ago, there was 5 or 6 different modules that we had to pass. And just in time was its own module at the time. And when we were studying Kanban, he actually used it to settle a running debate in his household. He and his wife had a running argument as to which one of them was responsible for ensuring that he had a dress shirt for work each day. And she felt like she had a full-time job and a couple kids, and he could help out. And he didn't seem to think it that way. So there was many a day that he came to work wearing the shirt that he had worn one other day that week, and the rest of us could snicker and know that, it was a rerun. So he used what he was learning about Kanban to set up a system to where he had a red hanger for the next to clean dress shirt for work. And when that red hanger came to the front, he knew it was time for him to wash his shirts and iron them and get them ready. So there was, peace at home, and he had clean shirts. The only downside was we had nothing to laugh about when he showed up in the morning. So his using of Kanban helped him to understand the concepts. He and I went on to develop a Kanban cell at our work environment. And so that was one of my funniest stories about applying what you learn. But just recently, I had a student finish up on CPIM Part 1, and he manages the assignment of new jobs in a engineer to order type of environment. And he's using what he has learned about rough cut capacity planning to do a better job of just determining which of the company's facilities actually has the capacity to support each of the jobs as they arrive. So I love to hear stories like that. And I love that it helps people to cement what they are learning. Questions, anybody, about studying for the exam?
Hey, Maryanne, John Capron here. I think we talked a little bit about this the other day. You think there's an opportunity now with Zoom to do remote study groups for people that we never had before?
I definitely do, John. I definitely do. I actually run study groups for my students. We call them review classes, and we go through the learning system together. Now, this could be easily be done by a group of students. One student would share their screen. They would go into the learning system. They would call up the quiz or the exam, and the group could go through it together. And one of the insights that comes from that, again, is that, one person may understand a question a little bit better than somebody else. When they start explaining why they chose the answer that they chose, then that helps others to see what they might have been misunderstanding about the question or misreading. So I think that remote study groups using Zoom or WebEx or whatever platform you have to your avail is a wonderful idea. It comes back to that idea of consistency as well, right? You might come home from work on a particular night and feel like, I just don't really feel like studying tonight. But, I made this commitment to my buddies, and the call is in a few minutes, and I'm just going to jump on it and see how I do. And then the next thing you know, you've actually met your commitment both to your friends and to yourself.
Okay.
Other questions about anything regarding studying? If not, then let's talk about that wretched exam and how to pass it. So first thing that I think you should do is decide now when you want to take the test. Set a date for the test. I recommend to my students that once your class or your self-study is, you've gone through the material, then take the test within 30 to 60 days after that completion. Worst case scenario, don't go more than 90 days. In the 20 years that I have been teaching full-time, one of the biggest mistakes that I see people make is they wait too long to take the test. It was true 20 years ago. It's even more true now as we're living in such a volatile era. There's so much on our plates that the longer we wait, the harder it is to retain the information. So test relatively quickly. Don't wait too long. You can now take the test in person, or you can do it in a web format. If you decide to test in person, set your date, make sure you know your location. If you can, drive to the location prior to the test so that you will relieve any nerves about finding the location, knowing where to park, knowing anything about traffic issues that you might face the day of the exam. When you go to take the test in person, you will need 2 forms of identification, and one must be a photo-bearing form of identification. You will be escorted into the building. Yes, all of the sites are now socially distanced. All of the sites are going to require that you bring a mask. You will be escorted in. You will be photographed. All of your belongings will be placed in a locker. The only thing you will be bringing into the testing room will be your your form of identification with your photo, and of course your mask. You will be set up at a computer station, and some of the centers are providing a whiteboard, an erasable whiteboard for you to do your calculations on, or to have like a notepad or something to scribble on. You will not be allowed to erase that whiteboard. If you should fill it up, you will raise your hand and you will be provided with a new one. And the reason for all of this is that, unfortunately, folks have cheated on the exams over the years, and so now the requirements and the protocol is very, very stringent. If you test in person, the one advantage you have over online is that if you should need to use the restroom, you are allowed to leave the room to use the facility. The timing of your exam will still continue, but at least you can do that. The benefit of testing online is that you do it from the comfort of your home or your office, so all issues or concerns about traffic and about social distancing go away, but you will need to have a camera-enabled computer to your avail. You will be asked to place yourself in a room with a door, like an office room, or I actually did take the part 2 in December online to see what the process was like. And I tested from my bedroom because that's closest to my modem and my internet connection. And I was a little freaky about living here in the sticks in Maine that I would lose the connection. So they did ask me to turn my laptop around and show them all 4 corners of my room. I had to show them that my cell phone was placed out of my reach and that there was nothing in front of me except the laptop. And then they do a little diagnostics and then they finally start your exam. So from that point on, it's almost the same as testing in person. You'll have a toolbar across the bottom of the screen that will show you how many questions you have answered, how many more you have left to answer. You can mark questions and go back to them. It will show you how much time you have left. So testing online for me was a very simple process, which actually wasn't true when they first set up the online testing about a year ago now. Those first couple months after the COVID hit, it was pretty rough for folks who were trying to test online. There's a lot of bugs in the system and a lot of disappointed folks. But since I'd say the end of the year, I have had no one complain about any problems with testing online. I really, really liked it. The only thing that I did wrong in testing online was because I had taken the test so frequently in person that I skipped the tutorial and I did not know how to use the calculator. Or no, it wasn't the calculator. I'm sorry. It was a little whiteboard. There was like a screen that I could have scribbled on, but I elected not to go all the way through the tutorial. And so I really only had one problem that I wished I would have had something to write out flesh out my idea. So I just guessed at that particular question. The test itself is 150 multiple choice questions. You will have 3.5 hours to answer all of the questions. I almost never have had somebody come back and tell me that they ran out of time. So I want you to feel confident that you will have sufficient time. Even my students from outside of the US who struggle with language issues still tell me that the 3.5 hours is a sufficient amount of time. So let's stop there and ask if there's any questions about the testing process itself, the day of the test.
Yeah, it sounds pretty straightforward.
If you're a morning person, I would recommend you test in the morning. Most centers will have morning appointments and afternoon appointments. There's other people taking other tests at these centers, so you might be in the same room with somebody taking a real estate test or a text prep test. Can't remember what they're called, but anyway, you could be in the room with the individuals taking other types of tests. So normally the centers have morning appointments, afternoon appointments. So if you're the person who gets up and you're at your best first thing in the morning, pick a morning. If you don't get going until after lunch, then test in the afternoon. My one sort of off to the side comment is that I have tested with some really great instructors who met the night before and had some cocktails. And I've even tested with a few folks who had a cocktail with their lunch and went on and were very successful on the exam. I have tried that. I ended up with a raging headache. So I always tell my students I'm fully on board with you having a cocktail to celebrate after the test, but maybe you should go in completely sober the day of the test. I would say the same thing about your sleeping and eating habits. If you do better eating a good protein meal, do that. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. Don't stay up all night cramming. If you don't know it by the night before, you're probably not going to know it by cramming all night. So get a good night's sleep, go in there and feeling confident that you did everything you could have done, and now's the time to just reap the rewards of your hard work. With that, I would say Use the learning system quizzes and tests and do them more than once. If once you are scoring 80% or better consistently on the quizzes and tests, then for heaven's sake, go take the real test. I can't tell you how many times I get an email or a phone call the night before or a couple days before somebody is scheduled for the test and they want to know, how do I cancel it? I'm not ready. I'm going to fail. And usually what I do with them is I go to the learning system with them and I look at their scores. And if I feel like they're really not ready and we're within the window of opportunity where they could postpone it, then I would recommend that. But if their scores are 80% and higher, then I simply say, go do it. You are ready. You're just talking yourself out of it. And, the answer to the question is of what if I fail is, what if you would pass it and you forego the opportunity to do that? So take the test. The two reasons that people don't get these certifications in my years of experience is, one, they take too long to go take the test, and two, they don't use the learning system tools as well as they should. Only twice in the last, I'd say 17 years since the CSCP learning system first came out, only 2 students have passed without my confidence that they were using the learning system. And in both cases, once they let me know they passed, I wanted to know, how the heck did you do it? Because I didn't see you using the learning system. One told me he wrote out in longhand all of his concepts. That was a CSCP student. The second one was also a CSCP student. And because she knew that I could see her scores, she was ashamed that I would judge her for getting low scores. So she would take the quizzes and tests, but she would back out before she answered the last question so it wouldn't record her score. And I thought that was kind of silly, because I don't go and monitor my students for the purpose of shaming them or thinking badly of them. I use my ability to see their scores to help them know how to get better. It is not unusual, even for instructors, to do poorly on the quizzes and tests the first time we go through them. Either we don't read the questions carefully enough, or we think we know everything, or we get stressed out time-wise. So the quizzes and tests are not just a evaluation of how well you're doing. They're a learning tool in of themselves. I can't tell you how many concepts I feel I know better because I carefully read the rationale from the folks who write the quizzes and tests. Now, that doesn't say that I don't find questions that I object to, but the thing you want to remember about the quizzes and the test questions is that the correct answer is the answer that is appropriate across industry and across learning or manufacturing environments, and is the most complete answer. So sometimes when we get down to 2 potential choices, we feel like, that the folks doing the testing are trying to trick us. And it's really not true. I have written test questions in volunteer workshops. It's very difficult to write a question that is completely devoid of any sort of opportunity to be misunderstood. And to that point, the questions on the actual exams have been analyzed by multiple groups of individuals before they ever make it to becoming a scorable test question. So you should go into these exams feeling confident that the questions that you're being tested on are good questions, they're comprehensive questions, and that any chance that they were misleading anyway has basically been removed. Questions about the quizzes and tests and the application on the exam? Anybody?
I cannot have a question.
Maureen?
Yes.
Maureen, can you speak up a little tiny bit? I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Sorry. I can have a question, please.
Okay.
Yeah. I've written the CLTD exam twice. The first one,
I'm still having a really hard time hearing you.
okay, just a
Let's see if my volume is all the way up.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes, that's better. And I'm moving my volume up a bit too. Okay.
I've written the CLTD exam twice now. The first time I scored 293,
Mhm.
lacking behind by 7 points. The second time 250 something, lacking behind by 9 points, I guess. And all at the same time, I keep wondering what I did wrong because I've gone through the learning system twice, over and over, and while taking the pre the pre-planned exam on the study guide the the model the models, I see that my scores are always like 80%, 85%, or 90% and above when I take those pre-exams. But then in the main exam, I keep scoring 2 something, 290 something, I keep not getting to the 300 cutoff point. I don't know if it's if I'm doing something wrong, so that's why I'm like, I need to know if something is wrong or if I keep missing the point or something.
So a couple different things, Maureen. It could be a little test anxiety that you know the material, but you get into the test center and you just talk yourself out of the right answer. You second guess yourself. It could be that perhaps you're not reading the questions completely enough, thoroughly enough to make sure that you're not skipping over words like except or always or most often. So I would advise that you read the test question twice, you read all of the potential answers twice, and then ask yourself which answer would be appropriate no matter what industry was involved, which answer is more complete than perhaps another answer. So take your time in choosing your answer. And another thing that students often do that sort of prevents them from passing is they go back and they change a lot of answers because they've second guessed yourself. So if you mark answers and go back to them, I want you to use 2 rules for changing an answer. Number 1, you've reread the question and you realize that you overlooked a word like except or most or always. So make sure that you are changing the answer because you realize that you misread the question. Or 2, you've looked at another test question and that caused you to realize or remember something that you didn't quite remember when you were answering a question the first time. So if in reading another test question, you realize that, oh, now that I'm thinking about this, that other question my answer to that other question couldn't possibly be right, then those are the 2 criteria for changing answers. If you're simply going back to a question and changing your answer because you've second guessed yourself, stick with your first answer. The odds are that your initial answer, your intuition, was the right answer, and you're talking yourself out of the right answer. Does that make sense, Maureen? So some other things that you want to know about answering the test questions is that you have 150 questions and you should answer every single one of them, even if it does come down to a best guess. You are looking to accrue 300 points or more. You're not going to be penalized for wrong answers, so to speak. It's to your benefit to answer every single question. There's a couple tools within the learning system. There's advice from other longtime instructors about test taking tips, and I completely encourage you to go and take the time to look at those little videos as well. The intention is, I know that sometimes it's hard to believe that the intention isn't to provide trick questions, but really and truly, the questions are more straightforward now than they were 20 years ago. And there's been a lot of effort to try to ensure that the question is as straightforward as it can possibly be. Other questions, anybody, about setting up your test appointment, about the testing environment,
This is
about
your
the use of the
opportunity,
learning
folks.
system? How many of you are aware
Any
of the
questions?
exam? I got one more point, John.
Okay, no problem.
How many of you are aware of the exam content manual within the Resource Center of the Learning Systems? If you are not using this tool, you are overlooking a very valuable study tool. Exam content manual exists for all 3 certifications. It is located in the Resource Center. Unless you have the 7.0 material, it is actually located in the first pages of your participant guide. It has now been eliminated from the hard copy books and is only available in 7.0 within the Resource Center. But this exam content manual that I speak of is an outline provided by the exam committee as to what they expect you to know in order to be successful on exam day. So if you still have the hard copy of it, I highly recommend reading it thoroughly, highlighting points that you're still unsure of, making notes in the margin to yourself. If it's only available online, you can still download it. And if you're a paper and pencil person like me, I use highlighters. I highlight things that I'm unsure of. I go back to the learning system. I find it. I come back to my exam content manual and make myself a little note in the corner beside the phrase that I was unsure about. If you know what they mean, for instance, what is a supply chain, then you don't need to do any more with that particular topic because you can, in your own words, describe a supply chain. On the other hand, if you get a phrase like exponential smoothing or collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, if you get one of those terms and you're thinking, I don't know what this means, then go back to the learning system and look it up, and then put a note in the exam content manual that will trigger your mind as to what that particular phrase or concept is about. So the exam content manual is a wonderful tool for you. And I think I'm done now, John. I can't think of anything else that I haven't mentioned that I should have mentioned.
Wow, this is pretty good. I wish I'd had this when I took my exam years ago. Folks, any questions while we have Maryanne here? Although I think you pretty much covered everything, so I don't think there's too many open switches here. I'll tell you what, I'll count to 3, folks. 1, 2, 3. All right, I think we're good to go. Maryanne, you want anything to wrap up here on staying in touch? Maybe?
Yeah, they should feel free. Anyone who wants to should feel free to find me on LinkedIn or on Facebook or through my website. I will be happy to answer questions if they occur to you after today and you're thinking, oh, gee, I wish I had asked her about blah, blah, blah. Feel free. Drop me an email and I'll be happy to answer you.
Okay. I know it's Monday at work. Usually that's about the time all the stuff hits the fan. You got a week to work it out. So we're going to let everybody get back to work. And Maryanne, I want to thank you a lot for doing this. It's
You're
really
welcome.
been good. John, you got any questions? I see you just popped on. You're mute. Let me unmute everybody here. See if that
I'm
works.
sorry. I'm sorry for joining so late. I did not have any additional questions, but I must have missed a really good session.
You did, but you got a saving grace here. I'm going to be putting this up on our YouTube channel and be sending out a notice with a link, so you'll have the entire conversation.
Terrific.
By the way, if you have any questions that are burning, we got Maryanne here right now. She can take a stab at it for you.
Sure.
Maryanne, I just a little bit about me. I am an executive with IBM, but I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Connecticut. I was wondering if there were any resources available for students that might be interested in supply chain management, or to the extent that I want to do a module in one of my MBA classes on supply chain management.
Oh, there's all
And
kinds
maybe,
of.
Maryanne, maybe I'm asking the wrong person.
No, there's all kinds of information that's available within ASCM. There are some principles courses that are pretty short and sweet that, would be high level understanding of supply chain. There's a lot of things on YouTube. I was saying to everybody that, when I was studying for the certification the first time around, 30 years ago, it was all what we had in books in front of us and in textbooks, and there was nothing like YouTube available. You can go to YouTube and you can do a search of supply chain management overview, and you can get a lot of really good things that you can show to your class very, very affordably, like dirt cheap, right? That would be intro to supply chain management.
Okay.
And ASCM has a variety of different presentations now, different blogs and videos and such that they're putting out constantly.
And I'm a member of ASCM, obviously, but is there a way for students to get access to the content without being a member?
I think there's some things that are available for members and non-members, and then there's a certain subcategory of things that are available to members only.
Okay.
But I think you should be able to find some things that you can easily share with your students.
Wonderful.
That
Well,
knowledge.
thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right, folks. With that, we'll say until next month for our next webinar. And again, Maryanne, thank you very much. This has been very helpful.
Thank you, everyone. Good luck with the exams. Thank you, John, for doing this.
Not
Thank
a
you,
problem.
John, for your good questions. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.